Hey everyone, I don't usually make other videos outside of MogTalk too often, but this is definitely a special occasion. Every once in a while, I get a chance to interview Yoshida, the producer and director of Final Fantasy XIV. Of course, if you haven't heard of Final Fantasy XIV, I have no clue why you're on my channel and watching this, but please check out the free trial, because it's a critically acclaimed MMORPG, and you can play all the way up to level 60. I asked eight to nine questions, just general things about rating, a couple PvP questions, and I wanted to ask some stuff about Gold Saucer because I'm selfish and I like to ask questions about Gold Saucer. And just to give you a little bit more background, the interview was just me sending over a handful of questions and then them coming back and responding. So it's not really a back and forth. It was just questions I could think of that I'd like answered, and he just went down the list and answered all of them for me and sent them back. So let's go ahead and get into it. As some of you know, I did a good bit of following the 48-man Savage that was released earlier this year. Can't really say it right. It's Delubrum Reginae, a Savage. I probably should have looked up how to say that beforehand. And so I wanted to ask him a question about that. Hello, Yoshida-san. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my questions. I'd like to first pose a few topics from the rating community. Did you and the development team watch players progress through and solve the mechanics for Delubrum Reginae Savage on the first clears following the release? If so, what was your reaction or thoughts in regards to how the first groups completed the content? Did anything surprise you or catch your attention in particular? And he responded with some very kind words to start off with. He said, "Thank you, as always, for your support. There are quite a few Japanese players who watch MogTalk, and I'm sure they look forward to new episodes of the show as much as we do." Now on to the questions. We always watch along as players take on new content. With the Delubrum Reginae, I was surprised with how quickly players discovered the secret of the mini trap. I believe people may have been able to guess the secret since there was a somewhat similar hidden mechanic in Baldesian Arsenal. But even so, I was simply amazed by our players' power of observation. Hats off to them. Next time we develop content like BA or DR, I'll make sure that there is more of a twist to these kinds of things, which he laughed at. Because this was the first 48-man or 48-person high difficulty raid in a game, or in the game. Many of the boss fight mechanics were intended to be handled by each individual. While that was a deliberate choice, next time I'm thinking of adding more mechanics that need to be handled by groups. And he had an evil grin emoji at the end of that. So look forward to that. I'm thinking hopefully there's going to be more challenging, large-scale Savage content in the future. Next, I start to inquire about what other types of difficult content he might be trying to introduce to the game. So I ask, are there any additional types of content or additions to existing content you have considered introducing with Endwalker or beyond for players who like challenging raid content? While we currently do Savage and Ultimate raids, and occasionally another type of large-scale challenge such as BR, DR, Savage, I'd be curious to know the stance on bringing new challenging content to the game, perhaps something like Savage difficulty dungeons. And he responded, "I'd like to refrain from giving away too many specifics at this time, but I think the chances of doing large-scale challenging content is greater than creating high-difficulty content meant for smaller groups. It's not that we are unable to create high-difficulty content for small groups, but I'm currently a bit more hesitant with that direction overall. In the case of 4-player high-difficulty dungeon, there is much less room for players to work with when it comes to party deaths or mistakes. If even a single party member is incapacitated or makes a mistake, it will invariably lead to a wipe, with not much leeway to save the run or come up with a creative solution. Another reason is because our community continues to grow. Naturally, this is bringing in many casual players, and I believe that when looking at the bigger pictures, large-scale content will be easier for all players to get into. If anything, one possibility might be high difficulty floors of Deep Dungeon series, but please stay tuned for future announcements. So I always try to fit in questions about high-end 4-player dungeons because that's something that players definitely have told me multiple times they want, and I have asked this in similar fashions before. I'm just trying to feel around and see if there's been progress for it, but it looks like they're definitely steering away from it. But it is interesting that he did put in the kind of House of the Dead type of high-level difficulty content might be coming in the future, but we don't know for sure. The third question I ask him deals with another thing that I keep trying to push and hope for, which is achievements, challenging achievements. And so the question was, is there any chance we will see challenge achievements implemented for Savage Raids in the future? For example, clearing a fight within a certain time limit or with disadvantageous if I can talk, conditions. It seems like a feature that could extend the content in an interesting way for raiders that like to challenge themselves. And he responded, I do feel there's room for consideration on this type of addition, and for at least the last year or so, I've been pondering some rough ideas on how this could work. I did consider the possibility of a condition to clear a certain dungeon within a certain amount of time, but there are many things to consider, even something as simple as how do we determine the beginning and end. I suppose if we just implemented a clock or timer that counts down after the players enter the dungeon, it wouldn't be impossible. I will continue to look into this a bit more and give it some more thought. Again, while that's not a completely definite answer, that's something that's going to happen, it does again show that it is something he's thinking about and implementing. I think with the timer, while we might look at that as like, well, there's already a clock in there, I think there's other variables that come in with creating that sort of environment for a dungeon than we think, and it might not be as simple as just adding in a new limit to the time of the dungeon and just completing it. But I don't know, maybe it is. I leave that in Yoshida's hands. The next question, I do ponder a bit about job identities and also adding in a new melee, how it's going to affect the player base and how many people are playing what role in groups. And so I ask him this following question. When it comes to raid content, are there specific identities the team envisions for each of the DPS job roles? Melee, physical ranged, and magic, and ranged magic. Now that we can expect another melee DPS with Endwalker, which nearly balances the number of ranged and melee jobs overall, has the team changed the way they approach designing raids to account for the potential shift of the number of players playing in these different job roles. I'm curious if the damage bonus for having each DPS role in a group has any relation to how the team feels about the composition and job identities. And he responded, each of the DPS roles do have a clear intended place in battle, but it would be appreciated if you can allow me to refrain from making that information public. The reason I ask this is depending on how these roles fit within specific pieces of content, there could be cases in which those intentions cannot be fully realized. We always strive to meet our goals for each role, but there are times where we have to deviate from those intentions, or that it happens despite our best efforts. We do try to adjust how much damage one can deal without making any one DPS role more advantageous than another. But that is truly difficult to perfect this. You may have noticed this already, but starting with each piece of battle content in patch 5.4, we've been very careful to make sure we're doing additional testing to ensure melee DPS are not at too much of a disadvantage. We've paid specific attention to things such as the size of the boss's hitbox and the max melee range to ensure a more level playing field for the roles. When it comes to the topic of adding new jobs with an expansion pack release, both I and the development team are very particular about adding in a DPS as a new job. Inevitably, many players prefer to play DPS jobs and deal damage. Due to this tendency, I do believe it is imperative to add a DPS role to entice new players as well as satisfy existing players. Balancing out the number is based on our hope that the selection does not become skewed. I will say that is something I did notice about the melee having a little bit of an easier time with larger hitboxes and everything else. I'm not too sure about the job's identities completely from that, but it is interesting. It is really interesting that he kind of wanted to refrain a little bit from going too much into it. I am assuming they have an idea of what they want to do with every single role, but it's better to not just flat out say that so they don't set themselves up for failure when there's so much that they have to manage. Now, of course, also something a lot of people know about me if they watch my content is that I do care about PvP in Final Fantasy XIV, so I always try to sneak in some questions. And I do know they are going to give more information at FanFest, so I try not to go too overboard with it. I just asked a couple of questions about PvP. So the first one, I would, of course, like to ask questions our PvP players may be interested in. You may, you mentioned, and sorry guys, I'm stumbling a little bit because it's real late, and I'm trying to get this out before Saturday, so bear with me. My mind isn't completely here, but I'm doing my best. I am. So you mentioned that in February that the plan for a new small-scale PvP mode is that, is there anything you can hint at in terms of exactly what scale small scale might be? Is something just smaller than our current front lines, or is it something as small scale or even smaller scale than the Feast is? So just maybe 2v2 duels, for example. And he responded with, I will create an opportunity to provide more details separately, so I will avoid getting too much into details. However, generally speaking, it will be much smaller than Frontline, while being at least the same or slightly larger scale than Feast. One reason for this is that the Feast tends to put a lot of pressure and responsibility on individual players due to how few can participate at one time. That's all I can say for the time being. Oh, and we've decided on the content's name. So that was about what I expected. That is actually information there to know it's going to be at least at the size of Feast or bigger. It is interesting to see what they will come up with. We aren't going to be getting very small 2v2 battles in the future, at least from what he said there. And next question, with all of this happening, I do have concern about the competitive side of it because they did say it was going to be kind of casual. So I do ask this next question. You also mentioned that this PvP content might be more casual, but will there still be room for those who want challenging PvP content with rankings? Will this content feature any sort of leaderboard or competitive aspect that the current Feast players can look forward to? And he responded with, I do feel that an element of competition is very important, so I would like to continue supporting that aspect and moving forward. Furthermore, I plan on implementing a new reward system in order to increase the number of competitors joining. Now, this might not be the details that we're looking for with that, but it is interesting, or at least it's good to know that he does still think there should be some sort of competitive outlet. We'll have to see what that looks like in the future. Now I'll get into the questions Frosty would ask, because Frosty wants to ask these questions. Lastly, I will ask a few selfish questions on content I'm interested in. I'm definitely excited for the new content coming to Gold Saucer, but I can't help but wonder if any of the older content will see updates, such as Chocobo Racing. You've told me previously that Chocobo Racing was created by just one team member who is now part of the raid development team. Do you ever think maybe to give a newbie developer a chance to make a new map for it? And he responded with, honestly, there is so much content available currently that we have not been able to dedicate the resources to maintain or update all of it, with a grimace emote. However, we are able to allocate resources to update. We were able to allocate resources to updating Triple Triad, and I think we are in a good spot with that now. I have been thinking about what we should work on next, so I'll keep that in mind as a candidate. And he laughs. So there you go, Chocobo Racing fans. Maybe I did my part to try to encourage updates for it. Hopefully we will see something in the future. And my next question, I asked him about minions because I feel like they could be utilized a lot more in mini games, since right now they're just for the Lords of Verminion, which I do like. It unfortunately didn't pick up too much, but I asked him this question. I've enjoyed Lords of Verminion and its use of minions to create a RTS-like minigame. Is there any chance we will see minions use similarity in other minigames? Something that I've always thought would be fun is a 1v1 minigame that would be a turn-based battle system similar to Final Fantasy Tactics. And he responded, I think that's a very interesting idea, but in order to make it like the masterpiece that is Final Fantasy Tactics, we would require significant sensibilities in battle and level design. That being said, I've always wanted to create some sort of kind of content using minions, or a card battle game that's different than Triple Triad, or even content that utilizes the Gambit system. So I'm definitely looking into the possibilities. I'm trying to consider ways to make things like these make these things fundamentally easier to implement, but it will require years of preparation. So I hope you don't mind a bit of a wait. So maybe no Final Fantasy Tactics and mini games for Final Fantasy XIV, which is something I've been hoping for at some point, anytime in the near future. But we'll see. We'll see what comes up next. And then the last part, I kind of gave up asking a final question, instead just kind of mentioned my appreciation to him because I have been doing this for a while, and I just wanted to tell him and show him what all the hard work his team and everyone else was able to foster and create within the community and help inspire me to do what I did. So this is my last statement to him. Instead of a final question, I'd like to say a few words. I've been working with the Final Fantasy XIV community for over 6 years now, interviewing players and discussing the game in over 200 podcasts, helping the community track the world race for Savage and Ultimate, working in official events on stage at FanFest for the Feast Regional Championship, and most recently running a charity event for the world race, managing over 40 volunteer staff members, which raise tens of thousands of dollars for children in hospitals to receive video games. Never in my life did I expect the game to be such a huge part in my life, but working with the Final Fantasy XIV community has become something that I love to do. Without the hard work of your team and yourself, which created such a great game and fostered a passionate community, I would have never done it. All in all, I would like to thank you personally and everyone on the Final Fantasy XIV team, from the developers to the community managers. I'm excited to see what ways I can continue to work with the community in the future. And he responded that last statement. He said, "We always look forward to seeing your Final Fantasy XIV content and activities, and we are very thankful for your dedication and contribution, Frosty. You had played such a large part in exciting players for the world first races, and I really appreciate that. Just one thing. The comments from the members of the world first teams during your interviews with them can sting a bit. So whenever you do those interviews, it would be helpful if you could get them to say some nice comments or take our side in the conversation, which he laughs, saying that. Come to think of it, during the Eden's Promise raid series, there was a bard who said something along the lines of, "It's because Yoshida didn't play this content." But I happened to beat all of the fights and even did pretty well, I think. Please let them know that. Well, my skill may probably pale in comparison to theirs, but LOL. All right, so World Verse players, the next time you're on you're on MogTalk, let's be better about that, because he watches the show. That's amazing. I think that's wonderful, and I know exactly who he's talking about, and I'll have a stern conversation. I will. But yeah, that's all my questions that I got answered. It gave a little bit of detail on this, some stuff, and we did get to learn a little bit about stuff with how if they watched the content for World First and everything else, and how they what they thought of the progress in the most recent DR Savage, as well as the likely size of the Savage, the PvP that's coming up soon, the new PvP mode, and some other things. And so I appreciate you guys listening to all this. Please feel free to comment on your thoughts on the questions, and we will be doing a MogTalk on Saturday to discuss this with various members of the community, to discuss this interview and go kind of into detail of why these questions were asked and kind of what these responses mean. So thank you guys, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.